This is the first time we've met, but I first saw you on Space Tomato. You did a podcast with him. And that was kind of the first time I realized that the amount of depth to the lore behind Star Citizen was so deep. Because I knew they were going to flesh it out with the single player, Squadron 42, but I assumed that for the most part, a lot of it was just kind of little bits and pieces of like narratives that they were releasing here and there. I didn't realize until you did a podcast with him going deep in the lore that they had fleshed it out to this extent. Because, I mean, it seems like there's almost more lore in Star Citizen than like, equivalent.
At times?
Yeah, for sure gameplay. Yeah. Way easier to talk about Star Citizen than actually play Star Citizen in many situations. But for everybody who doesn't know who you are, do you want to kind of explain who you are in the YouTube sphere and the Star Citizen world?
My name's Paul Shelley. I run a Twitch and YouTube channel called TheAstroPub. I focus on Star Citizen. I don't exclusively do Star Citizen, but most people know me from Star Citizen because I do a gameplay, but I also do a podcast called The Captain's Table where I bring people on to talk about the game. And I also do a lot of lore, a full lore breakdown of Star Citizen from history to like the history of the events, ships, people, locations. I call it Galactic Historian, but I also do things like a Lore Citizen podcast. Right now I'm doing, for Invictus, I'm doing a thing I call the Lore Tour, where I go to the floor of Invictus and I look at all the ships and I say, okay, well, this is Aegis, this is when it was founded, this is its whole story, and this is this ship, it was made at this time for this reason, here's some famous examples of the ship in the lore, and kind of move it around to kind of give people some context.
It's actually really cool. I was watching one of them today, and you were talking about the Argo MPUV or whatever. And I was like, I had no idea you could talk about this little craft for so long, but there's so much info about it and stuff. It's really cool to hear your take on every ship. Because when I look at a ship, I go, okay, well, it's got 4 hard points and it does this much damage, and this is its turn rate in combat, and this is how much shield it has. And you're like, okay, it was built in the year 24 or whatever, and, and you get into the history of the company and its purpose at that time and its purpose now, and it's so much more interesting, and it's cool. And I had no idea that there was actually that much more information behind each ship in game.
Chris Roberts likes immersion. He really likes immersion. And so the beginning and end of any process that CIG does to make a part of the game is lore. So like the narrative team, like the team, let's say that they're making a new gun. The FPS team wants a new gun because they want to make a new SMG. And I go, okay, well, we want an SMG that's laser SMG that has a unique, let's just say, long range scope mode or something like that, something crazy. So they'll go to the lore team and say, hey, this is our idea. And the lore team will go, that sounds like it's made by Gemini or Castak or Bering. And they'll get, okay, cool. And so then they'll go back and they'll look through some of their artwork and try to figure out how to craft it and then make the look of it. And then they go through the process of making it. And then once it gets released, they go back to the lore team and the lore team goes, okay, so it was made at this time. It was made for this purpose. These are the people who uses it. It's very popular with this, and try to fit in with based on what the team has made that gun to be. So as a result, everything has lore to it, and it's for immersion purposes, but it's also for gameplay purposes because of reputation. So for me, it's just that fascinating part. So
this game is interesting because I like narrative content, but I usually get it from film or books. And I'm not usually drawn to narratively strong games that much, because usually I get annoyed with like lackluster gameplay, and I'm like, I'd rather just watch a movie with actors instead of playing a mediocre game with a great story. So that's like my thing. But with Star Citizen is kind of surprising me because it's the first game that's like really drawing me in with the gameplay aspect, but the lore is adding like this new sense of depth to everything in the game, where the ships just take on this extra sense of meaning, and the design styles and all that stuff that you see in it. It's just, you're like, yeah, that's an RSI ship, I can tell. Or that's that ship is an Anvil ship. I can totally like understand why Anvil makes that ship, where you're like, oh, check out the new Origin luxury yacht or whatever luxury cruiser. It just like adds this extra little element, and the fact that the lore plays into the gameplay itself in significant and meaningful ways is just like, it's just cool to get into. It's fun to get into. It adds this extra element that is so much more beyond just like, here's a space sim, here's a ship that's good at hauling cargo, here's a cool fighter. Like it's deep. And the fact that we have this much depth already. I don't even know where you access this stuff, because I see the little stories that come out every now and then, like RSI or Clad Imperium will post a little like lore story about some characters in the verse at some point in time, but it's usually only a few pages. And you've like, when you talk about something, you just have all this information. I'm like, where does this come from? Like, I have no idea.
My background is in teaching. I'm a teacher is my day job. So history teacher. So the thing that I like to do, the thing I like to do with history is the drama of history is establishing a story, like taking puzzle pieces and putting together as a story, and then kind of translating it and connecting it to the other bits. Like, oh yeah, well, this thing happened in the 100 Years' War, but this thing was going on at the exact same time, and they're right next to France, so they must have had this impact here and there. It's like, oh wow, that's cool. You start to realize these sort of connections, and CIG is kind of releasing their information in a similar way. So something like Argo, for instance, is the history of Argo is split up into 4 different articles. One which is on the actual company itself, which you have to go to the website for. Another which is on the MPUV brochure that they used. They used to make these brochures for every ship, where you had to go read that and they have the history through that. And then every so often they'll release something through their paid magazine called Jump Point, which has its own little history blurbs, which are a couple of pages. And then sometimes they'll do like biographies on like the founders of a company or an event that happened, where you see, oh, there's an Argo there. They mentioned the Argo in this section. So it is a puzzle. It's putting all these pieces together, and then like, because CIG doesn't want to do that yet, because they want to keep those things as loose as possible, so that if something comes up and they're like, well, the Argo needs to have been made at this point, they'll go, okay, well, we haven't fully established when this ship was being made, so we can go back and then boom, make that, because it's got to add into this story here, which will be tied into the universe, because that's why a 200-year-old wreck you find in Pyro has an Argo MPUV attached to it, sort of thing.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, sorry, that's just what I do.
No, it's fine, because I love going down the rabbit hole with Star Citizen, but on the off chance and the likely chance that some people are watching this and don't have like a great understanding of the universe of Star Citizen, I think a lot of people are somewhat familiar with the bullet points of Star Citizen, giant crowd-funded projects, 10 years of development, still in alpha, all this stuff around it, but they don't really have a concept. Like, I think a lot of people don't even know that Star Citizen takes place in the future, where it could be an alternate galaxy or some sort of other galaxy that has nothing to do with Earth and humanity. I was thinking, do you think you could summarize maybe the history of Star Citizen from like our present time now to what would that be, the 30th century?
Sure. I'll try to do my best to keep it short, because it's kind of extensive. But
yeah. Oh yeah. I know this could be 4 hours if it needed to be. I was thinking like the 5 to 10 minute version.
The short and quick version is that towards the middle of this century, overpopulation, resource scarcity, political conflicts are making it much difficult to live on Earth. So many major nations began to look to space as a solution, going to Mars and getting resources from the asteroid belts and so on and so forth. But they needed to make space travel cheaper and more efficient. And in 2936, a company called Roberts Space Industries was formed by Chris Roberts. And for those who know, yes, Chris Roberts put himself in the game.
Yeah. Wait, did you say 2946?
Yeah, 2036.
2036. Okay.
Yeah, that was my bad, probably.
I just wanted to clarify.
Back and forth with dates. But yeah, so 2036, which would be, it's a different Chris Roberts, yeah.
Pretty soon.
Pretty soon. It's a different Chris Roberts, not the same Chris Roberts.
You don't know. Maybe he'll make buddies with Elon Musk,
So he started off trying to make a space company, but wasn't so successful, difficult for him to get kind of his foot into the door with all these other companies that existed. So they developed like rechargeable batteries, like a recharger for electric cars, but for like batteries for electric cars, water purifiers to help purify more very like portable, easy to use water purifiers, and cricket farms to try to alleviate hunger. But he never really got, never really got into space. But by 2075, a engineer and scientist named Dr. Childress was graduating and had come up with this theory, this theoretical engine. And at that point, they had. I'm trying not to get into the weeds because this is a little different. They found a particle that would attach itself to certain type of isotopes, and they called this the quantanium isotope, or these isotopes quantanium isotopes. And this particle, which is a quantum transient particle, would affect space-time, so like it would literally bend space around it with its mass, like much higher than it should. And scientists had been able to capture it using these quantanium particles or quantanium metals, but they weren't able to know what to do with it. And Dr. Childress said, I can use this to turn it into effectively a warp drive. So he published his dissertation on this. Chris Roberts was going through a bunch of these, graduate dissertations, see if anything was interesting. He found his, he brought him on board, and within a couple of years, they built the first quantum core engine, which is the ancestor to all of the quantum engines we have in game, and which allows you to, which is effectively a warp drive. It creates a bubble around you, and you're allowed to go faster, up faster than you should be. And it goes up to 0.2 C or 20% the speed of light.
And for anyone who isn't intimately familiar with distances in space, 20% the speed of light is very fast and more than enough for getting around a solar system. But when it comes to traveling between a solar system, well, the closest system to ours right now is 4 light years away. So, multiply that now by like, what would that be? 20% the speed of light, like 5. So yeah, it's going to be a 20-year trip just to get the closest system using quantum drive tech. So it makes our solar system totally accessible, but not necessarily other solar systems.
Yeah, and early quantum drives only did 10% of the speed of light, and then the very earliest ones did 1%. So it took them a while to get to that degrees. But this allowed for easier, cheaper travel to the rest of the solar system and unlocked the solar system. So RSI then helped, with a bunch of other nations, founded what's called the Renatus Project, which was to terraform Mars, which worked until it didn't. And the failure of the Mars Terraformation Project killed 4,000 people, and it set back human colonization efforts by 20 years. But eventually it happened. It is the beginnings of the reasons why humanity doesn't like AI, because the core of the Renatus Project was an adaptive AI, which failed, and they blamed it eventually for the deaths of all of those people. And other projects would do that as well. But from there, the humanity continued to expand. They created their first attempt to leave the solar system, which was Project Artemis, which is basically a big, fast ship to shot it towards the nearest star, in hopes that they would put everyone in cryostasis with an AI running it. And about 15 years after that, ships began to disappear around the Neptune's moon of Neso, and no one knew what was going on. So a man by the name of Nick Croshaw began to study the effects of that region and realized that there was a wormhole, an undiscovered wormhole that was in this region, and it was being opened by a malfunctioning quantum drive. And so he mimicked the malfunctioning quantum drive to be able to open and close this wormhole. And he named this wormhole a jump point. And he built him along with RSI built the first jump capable ship called the X7, which is effectively the same design as the modern Aurora. The modern Aurora is obviously updated, but because this was in 2260. So this is about 200 years after about 100 years after the colonizations of Mars, and about 200 years after the beginnings of the first quantum engine being built. He got into the ship, flew it through the jump point, and came back. And so they named the system that he found Croshaw after him. Since then, humanity, basically the sky was the limit, because now they knew what to look for these jump points, because they found that they were naturally occurring all over the place. And humanity slowly started to grow, but the complications...
And do the jump points always end up in a solar system?
No. Sometimes they end up with just planets. There's a cool place called Min, which is just a gas giant. And sometimes there's one that's called Tamsa, which ends up in a black hole.
But they seem to be drawn to gravitational points. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So you don't just end up in the middle of
nowhere.
Yeah. Okay.
You almost always end up in some sort of gravitational point. And jump points do collapse. They have in history collapsed. But as these jump points were discovered, humanity expanded, but the political complications of settling these systems became and the cost became too big for one nation to handle. Because by this point, you had the nations of Earth, the nations of Mars, the nations of the various outer planets, and like say Jupiter and Saturn, nations in the asteroid belt. So it was a complicated political soup of humanity. And so by the time they'd terraformed the worlds of Croshaw with a joint effort of a bunch of nations from Earth, the UN at the time effectively said, let's just formalize this relationship and create a nation to kind of keep this whole thing working so we can continue to expand, because they were afraid of going back to the wars, the resource wars, and the overpopulation, and they needed to continue to push out and find more spaces to spread out, because they wanted to grow, but they also didn't want to go back to that time of the 21st century. So they created what's known as the United Nations of Earth, which held humanity together as kind of a loose coalition. Not everyone liked this. You had the Unification Wars, which is some rebellions that happened, but eventually they were put down. And those rebels who were put down eventually escaped. Many of them escaped and became the first pirates, which is the origin of a lot of the pirate gangs. Most of them are rebels from who didn't want this centralized authority. As humanity kept expanding, eventually we ran into aliens. We ran into the Banu first, who are this big, tall, Groot-like species. This was in the 2400s, 25th century. And the fun story about that was a explorer was looking for a jump point, and he saw a ship. And at the time, whoever reported the find first got credit for it. So he had been finding this jump point. He knew there was a jump point in the region for a while. So seeing another ship, he immediately thought, this is another ship that's trying to muscle in on my territory. So he shot at it.
Oh, great.
and missed. And after he missed, he was like, oh, that's not human ship. That is like a alien of ship of some kind. I am glad I missed.
Great introduction to humanity there. Shoot first, ask questions later.
So he called in the UNE because there was already protocol. Humanity had known by that point that they probably were going to encounter alien species. So they called in the UNE. The UNE came in, talked with the guy, tried to talk with him. They named him Jerry because they couldn't really translate his language, but they were working on translating his language when a Banu fleet showed up. And so the human fleet saw the Banu fleet, and they worked it out. And within a couple of weeks, they had translated each other's language. And the Banu immediately were like, "Trade relations, please."
Right, they're a very trading race. That's like the core of their culture, right?
They love unique aspects of everything. So they like shiny things. They like things that take a lot of skill and craftsmanship. Things that may be worthless to a human might be incalculably valuable to a Banu because of how much time and effort and skill it took. They respect skill above everything else, which is why they're very trade oriented, because they feel like if they're really, really good at a job and they get something done, they can trade their work for something else, and then they can value the thing that somebody else made. And they live in these. They don't really live in nations. They live in groups called Suli, which is like part family, part nation, and part like company, like guild.
Okay.
So, which you can bounce from Suli to Suli and all kind of things. So,
and for anyone also who's not currently in the Star Citizen persistent universe playing, there is currently a single Banu ship that you can fly called the Banu Defender, which is kind of a small fighter craft. And then soon, potentially towards the end of this year or early next year, there's going to be a much bigger ship called the Banu Merchantman, which is what it sounds like. It's a giant ship meant for trading and commerce, basically, right?
yeah, it's an old style ship that's been around in the Banu for a very long time.
Yeah.
But humanity really got along well with the Banu. We developed a lot of good relationships. We actually took one of their they practiced a religion called Luminalia. Well, not Luminalia. It was called something else, but it translates effectively to Luminalia. It's a candle celebration. After, like the first year after the contact, they had this celebration with humans, with a human crew, who then brought it to the rest of human space. And it's the thing that's Star Citizen celebrates for its holiday season is called Luminalia, which is, about gift giving.
Cool.
And passing forth. So they've even, like, all of the events in game are all glorified as well.
Right.
So
like Invictus, which is going on right now.
Yeah, which is effectively Fleet Week, which is the closest thing to like their Memorial Day sort of thing.
Yeah.
And moving forward from that, humanity then runs into the Xi'an. They do not run into the Xi'an a good way because of this push for humanity to expand as much as possible. Humans had discovered a planet, and they didn't do the due diligence of surveying the planet, of seeing what's going on the planet. They just immediately started to terraform it because they wanted to be able to claim rights on this planet. This company did. About a day into them trying to terraform the planet, these aliens show up with guns because they were trying to terraform a planet that they were living on. They didn't do a proper survey, and we find out that there's this city.
So they didn't find a city on the planet? They didn't just look for something?
they just went straight there. They said, this is a planet, this is great for terraformation, we're going to go for it, because they were all about trying to claim it for
Was this just a company?
Yeah, it was a company. Private company.
Weird question, and I don't know if they've addressed it in the lore yet, but when they met the Banu and basically developed and started to translate and communicate effectively with them, did the Banu say, hey, there's a bunch of other aliens out there? Or
no.
Were we the first alien species they had run into as well?
No.
They didn't tell us? Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, because the Banu, the best way of saying is that the Banu are they don't want to tell you what you don't need to know. And the last thing the Banu want to do is have a unique species that they're trading with have access to other species, because then those species won't be able to trade. So,
they're very excited to make friends, but it's also trading tactics the whole way through.
They're still very careful about, like, they're very eager about anything, but they're also very careful about how they approach every other civilization.
Okay, gotcha.
They're still ruthless at times about their own nature. So turns out that this species is the Xi'an. They captured this terraforming crew. They sent one of the crew back to human space. And so the UPE sent in, or the UNE sent in a fleet. And when they sent in the fleet, the Xi'an sent in a fleet. And the UNE realized right away that this fleet is highly more advanced than humanity has ever been. And they were not playing around. So after about a good couple months of very tense standoff compared to the Banu, they translated it, and the negotiations began to get the terraforming crew back, because technically humans had effectively tried to genocide a group of, trying to massacre a group of Xi'an with terraforming tech, and so they weren't quite pleased with that.
Yeah, we like to breathe air. I don't know what you guys like to breathe, but that's not what we're making.
And so what they end up doing was the Xi'an said, you can have your people back, but we want the entire stellar maps of your entire territory. Everything.
Wow.
All your jump point routes, everything. And humanity was like, we just met you. We don't know who you are. I don't want to do this.
Yeah, we're not going to give you all of our tactics and defense points and weaknesses and everything. Yeah.
So it took a while, but eventually the UNE gave up this information to get these people back and to hopefully begin, good communications, good relationships with the Xi'an. And the Xi'an were still very standoffish. So humanity was at this point where we'd met a friendly species and a standoffish species. So for the longest time, the UNE was worried about going to war while they're still expanding their territory, because they knew now that they were going to start running into other alien species. And in the middle of this conflict and this stress, they ran into another species called the Tavaran, who were actually less advanced than us in many ways, but more advanced than others. And the Tavaran themselves were going through their own overpopulation. They didn't have terraforming tech, so they're overpopulated. They were experiencing population stresses, and their society is very martial. They whereas like the Xi'an, I forgot, the Xi'an look like turtle people. They look like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And the Tavaran are bird people. They look like flightless birds.
And again, for people watching who want to know how this relates to the actual universe right now, I think there's only one Xi'an, two Xi'an ships?
Two. There's the Aopoa Cartual and the Aopoa Nox.
Right. Okay. Yeah. The land speeder thing. And their ships look pretty cool. And there's another medium freight ship coming out soon, I think. I don't know if they've announced any other Xi'an ships.
A medium fighter, the Santokyai, which is like kind of like their version of the Hornet. So.
Okay. Gotcha. And I like the design of them, and they look very, very alien, very different from what you're used to seeing in game.
All their ships are vertical. So like instead of they're vertical and they come out from the center, rather than humans, which are like space planes or more traditional spaceships. All of their ships are up and down.
Yeah, so. And the fighter that they have in game right now has some pretty unique characteristics where it can like kind of strafe at like faster speeds than other ships and stuff like that because of the way it's designed. So it is neat that it brings entirely different characteristics, where we're like, well, it needs to fly like an airplane, and that's not like a concept that they're worried about. So it is cool seeing that translate from their culture into their ships as well.
Yeah, just about all of the lore will translate directly into the gameplay as well for that, just those sorts of things. But we meet the Tavaran. Tavaran are having their own problems. Humanity bungles the first contact with Tavaran. The guy who first discovers them shoots a probe towards them and realizes that was a bad mistake. And then returns back to try to talk with the UNE and things, or at that point they had sort of transitioned from the UNE to a new, because humanity had grown so large that more people lived outside of the solar system than lived inside the solar system. Yet Earth and the solar system was still the center of everything. And there wasn't really a lot of representation for people outside of the solar system in this government. So they had transitioned away from the UNE to what they called the United Planets of Earth, where it was more of a, like each planet had more representation, but power was also funneled into what's called the triumvirate. Three major leaders, one of the legislative branch, one of the military, and one of the judicial branch. And so they were like the final arbiters, and they worked together to kind of figure things out. They had their own kind of departments. But we meet the Tavaran. The Tavaran don't like us. They start a war. So the very beginning of the first war humanity had ever really fought in an interstellar conflict happens, and we do very badly very quickly because the UP doesn't have an army or a navy. They do, but very limited. And this is why Invictus happens, because after the first year, they realized they needed to build an army and a navy, so they gathered people in at the same day to try to train all these people to become soldiers, which that day was the same day for all of the planets for like kind of a muster day, and that became the Invictus Day that we celebrate in the verse today. So the brief, trying to finish through the brief, because this is in 2542, so we're still like
we're getting close, halfway there.
The war eventually turns because of an invasion to retake a human system called Idris. The battle goes very badly, and the last person in charge of the invasion is a young army captain by the name of Ivar Mezer. And he takes control and saves the invasion and helps push back the Devarn and win the battle for Idris IV. And as a result, he becomes a hero overnight. He becomes this massive public figure in humanity, and he gets a promotion to colonel. He becomes a major figure for the rest of the war, really kind of running the war and eventually helps lead the invasion of the Tevarin homeworld, defeating the Tevarin and actually bringing the captured leader of the Tevarin in chains to the Senate's floor as a prisoner of war to end the war with the Tevarin.
Wow. Cool.
So yeah, he becomes a very, very popular figure, and eventually gets elected to the position of High General, the head of the military, and then slowly, well, not so slowly, he effectively says, give me all the power because I'm the one who can protect us against the aliens. And not everyone liked this idea, so he started to orchestrate terrorist bombings and making it look like aliens did it to try to convince people.
Your tactics.
And then over time, he continued to do it. Eventually, enough people said, okay, cool, we'll just do this thing where he becomes the sole leader and gets all the power because he can save us. And then once he does so, he creates what's called the United Empire of Earth, which is what we see today, where you have with the creation of the Imperator, who's the one who controls all of the government. Then it passed down through measure to measure. So his son takes over after him. His son's daughter takes after him.
So there's no election system after that?
Only for the Senate, but the Senate has almost no power at that point. So the representatives still exist. But there are people who are resisting against this. There are people who don't like this idea, who want to try to return back to the old ways. But there is a lot of power being vested in the measures, and there are people who follow them.
Gotcha.
So, and this happens between 2542 through up until 2792.
It's a pretty successful reign, for the measures. Not too bad.
In the meantime, they fight the Second Tevarin War. The Tevarin, who had been scattered because they had been forced out of their homeland, rejoin under a warlord by the name of Korathal. New ships, new tactics. The UEE is just getting its butt kicked left and right and center. Nothing seems to work. And at the last moment, a penal squadron of basically pilots who were too good to throw in jail or execute because they're in the middle of a war, but don't follow orders, called Squadron 42, is the last stand before the victory of the Tevarin. And they pull off a trick where they effectively goat the Tevarin to go one at a time in through this jump point. And while they're getting to this formation where they're more vulnerable, Squadron 42 and their bombers turn on their ships because they'd been flying like acting like debris. And once they turn on their ships, they catch the Tevarin on off guard, wipe out half of the Tevarin forces, and eventually they lose the war. So that's where Squadron 42, the single-player game, that's that squadron. It becomes this legendary squadron of ace pilots who don't play by the rules.
Okay, gotcha. But Squadron 42 takes place much later.
Yeah.
So the single-player game that is going to launch, hopefully, in a few years.
Hopefully.
Whenever. In the future. Doesn't take place during this event in which they got their name. It takes place later, and it's still the same squadron, but obviously different people, right? It's the squadron in name and sort of maybe their identity to an extent.
It's like that's where their fame comes from. Like in the verse, Squadron 42 is known as the best of the best squadron in the entire UEE, and this is where their original, like that concept came from. And as time went on, they began to keep proving that they were the elite. So
it's funny that sort of jump point tactic you are talking about sounds very similar to Chris Roberts' film Wing Commander.
It is the Wing Commander. It's effectively the Wing
Commander tactic.
Yeah, it's cool. It's one at a time through the wormhole to get to them. Which is cool because I guess in game that is kind of the idea behind wormholes. The sizes will actually dictate how many ships or craft can
go through at a time. So yeah, if there's a battle situation in which you don't understand that there's a massive fleet or armed force waiting for you to come through, you could be sending your armed forces through one at a time to just get pulverized. So yeah, it's an interesting concept. Yeah, I would imagine that they'd probably every 4 ships or 10 ships they go through, they'd send a guy back and be like, we're all okay. Don't keep sending them through.
So after this, we see a long period of like the measures get worse and worse. Each measure is more ruthless, more brutal than the last. And finally, in 2792, a group calling themselves the Tide exposes the measures, kind of this, they had been doing things like disappearing people. People have been standing up against them in politics, especially a planet called Terra, which is for many people seen as like the second Earth. The quote that is the best describes Terra is, Terran senator once said, if you want to see where humanity has been, you go to Earth. If you want to see where humanity is going, go to Terra. So Terra is a separate planet in the Star Citizen universe.
Earth 2.0.
Yeah, it's effectively like Earth but perfect. It's bigger.
If we could do Earth again, how would we do it? Yeah,
exactly. Its environment was right out the box. Didn't require any terraforming. It was perfectly habitable for humans. It had a beautiful biosphere, and so like the people who came there were like, let's try to make this what we would do if we had Earth in its prime, and so that's kind of, it's led to them being incredibly arrogant, but it's also very beautiful. And it also helps that Terra is the nexus of 7 or 8 different jump points. So it's got a lot of access for trade all over the Empire, whereas Earth only has 2.
Gotcha.
So there's been some back and forth. That's a big political thing in the verse right now is should we move the capital from Earth to Terra because of defensive reasons, because of economic reasons, because of political reasons. And that's caused a lot of tension between various different factions. The people who live on Earth don't want to lose their power. People on Terra want to gain more power, and so on. So after all of this conflict, the Tide exposes the Mezzers because they discovered a planet where a species was in a just kind of getting out of a Neolithic stage. Like they had using tools, they were farming, they had families, they had language, they had art.
They discovered humans or an alien
species. Yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
An alien species that was just getting out of its own epoch. It was starting to evolve. It was a sentient species. And so for a long time, people were like, we got to study them. We got to figure out what's going on. We got to protect them because, this is our chance to be like the people who raise up a species to help them improve their lives and so those sorts of things. And the Mezzers just got bored with it. And so they started to walk around and be like, yeah, we're just going to terraform the planet. I'm going to put my yacht here. I'm going to put my palace here. And we're going to sell pieces off to my friends. And we're going to have big parties. And the process is going to kill all of the sentient species on this planet. But who cares?
Life. Yeah.
Yeah. So
they didn't have a prime directive.
No,
basically.
No. And when the terraforming began, much to the chagrin of the scientists who were there, some scientists managed to record the terraforming process as, these sentient species were literally choking to death as the atmosphere was changing around them. The whole family's dying, and they got this all on tape and record. And then this rebel group, the Tide, got a hold of this footage and then broadcast it over the entire UEE. And this was like the straw that broke the camel's back. It's like genociding an entire race because for your own rich desires. And the UEE tried to clamp down on it, failed to, because a lot of these Tide members had been trained by the UEE military, by the previous Mezzer, by the current Mezzer Imperator, who had actually couped his father to get hold of power. And he didn't.
Sounds like a nice group.
Yeah. So eventually the Mezzers toppled. The resistance was able to overthrow the Emperor, and then they came back and said, we're going to be kinder and gentler humanity. We're going to fix our relationships with the Xi'an. We're going to try to be more peaceful with the Xi'an. We're going to try to be less xenophobic. We're going to try to be more progressive and help everybody and all these sorts of things. And that's the kind of UEE we exist today from 2792 to 2952, the last about 150-ish years, 160-ish years has been under this new empire. In the meantime, though, towards the end of the Meser era, a new species called the Vanduul showed up. They attacked a system called Orion and were able to overwhelm the military and conquer the planet and destroy the whole system. They didn't negotiate. They were there to raid and harvest.
Yeah.
And humanity lost, I think, 3 systems before the fall of the Mesers, and then lost an additional 2 more systems.
So the Vanduul War essentially began before the fall of the Mesers. Mm-hmm. So there was a coup, or the rebellion against the Mesers happened in the midst of a Vanduul War, or
basically
did the Vandal just take some systems and then we were just backed off and we're like, I hope they don't take any more, or was it like an active conflict?
There's two stages in the Vanduul conflicts. They call them the skirmishes and the war. The skirmish period was where the Vanduul would invade a system, beat the humans there, force the humans back, and then they would just stay in this system and then just harvest the system entirely. And then once they had run out of resources, they would start to raid into the next system, and then that raid would slowly turn into an invasion, and then they would beat the humans back, and then they'd sit there and they'd harvest that system. So it was a slow process, but it was a methodical process. So, and the Mesers, that's one of the reasons why the Mesers fell, is that they weren't taking it seriously. They weren't actually caring about the Vanduul raids. They were, in fact, one of them used it as a example of like, we'll pull up if anyone near the Vanduul space defies me, I'll just pull out the military from that system and give it to the Vanduul. And so those are the sorts of things that would happen to why the people were just not okay with the Mesers by the end of that time. But unfortunately, the new UEE was still fairly weak after the whole debacle. So more systems would fall in a similar way. Virgil and Caliban would both fall. And finally, that brings us up to today, where the Vanduul are at our gates. The Xi'an and humans are still, they're at a peace, but a more tenuous peace. The Tavaran, whom we had almost genocided, are now coming back to their home planet that we still control and trying to kind of live a coexistence with humanity. The Banu are just Banu. The Banu are one of the only species that have a trade relationship with the Vanduul. So
they figured out how to trade with them.
Yeah. One clan at least, because the Vanduul have numerous different clans and hordes. They're not one.
Right. They're kind of tribal, right?
Yeah.
So there's even infighting among the Vanduul, correct?
They fight amongst each other all the time for power and for prestige. But when one leader rises to the top, he can form a horde, and that horde will effectively be multiple different clans that work together to overtake a system for the good of the Vanduul.
Did the Vanduul invent their own technology? Is it stolen? It seems like the tribal nature and infighting of their species doesn't seem like it would create a good environment for invention and progress and that kind of stuff.
That's the question. The most recent addition to lore is the regeneration systems. And regeneration is this thing in game. It's effectively an explanation for respawn, where why you respawn at a bed is because you can map your brain and effectively your memories, and it stores this thing called an Ibrahim sphere. Once it gets stored to the Ibrahim sphere, it creates a connection in interspace between your brain and this sphere. Now that which constantly updates information, so your memories are stored onto this thing, no matter how far away you are. And when you die, the connection is severed, and then the Ibrahim sphere can then it basically inject your memories into a new body, which is effectively a not really a clone, but like a genetic duplicate of you through a system, through this serum that they've used, they can use to like regen parts of body parts and stuff like that. And that the Ibrahim sphere was Vanduul tech. We captured it in a raid. We don't know exactly how it works.
Interesting.
And we don't even know why the Vanduul have it. and it looked like nothing the Vandal had used before.
When did humanity start using that tech? Because obviously that's like society changing technology.
Yeah, 2949.
Okay,
so only 3 years ago.
Super recent, and the ramifications of essentially not dying haven't quite been felt on the existence of humanity yet.
Eventually people die. The problem is that because like dying is pretty traumatic, you know, losing your arm and then feeling yourself die and then waking up again is kind of mess you up. And so
need a couple therapy sessions after a death.
So what happens is because the brain's constantly updating, if say like you have an accident, you lose your arm and you get a prosthetic, when you get regened, you're regened at the stage you died. And so if you're missing an arm, you will lose that arm. You won't get a new arm back. And over time, it's kind of like a copy of a copy. Eventually that each imprint is what they call it, gets worse and worse. And so you have what's called an imprint viability score. So eventually that gets down to 0, where an imprint will not take anymore, and you'll just be dead.
Right. You're kind of on your last life of your 9 lives or whatever.
Yeah. And then eventually in game, that means you re-roll a new character, and then you have to, that's the death of a spaceman sort of mechanic.
Right. So, gotcha.
But yeah, so because that's a Vandal tech, we don't know. They are partial scavengers and partial, they don't really, every invention that they make is just knives, because the Vandal love knives. They worship knives. They even do melee
really
combat
practical
in space.
Weapon in space combat. Well, yeah, right there, the Vandal blade, is it, or the scythe, whichever one
has
got the big knife on it, and it's like, you know, prepare for ramming speed type space tactics.
Melee in space.
Why not?
So they're big on that sort of thing. So
I think they're supposed to have some sort of harpoon launcher or grapple launcher at some point, right?
Kingship. Yeah, the Kingship is a giant harpoon launcher on it.
Sounds fun. I can't wait.
So yeah, that's kind of where we are. In Squadron 42 terms, the Squadron 42 takes place around the invasion of Vega, where the Vandal invaded a system called Vega, and we're doing pretty well. But then a kind of the hero of the modern UE, Admiral Bishop, played by Gary Oldman, manages to push out the Vandal, to stop the Vandal attack and push them out. And this is the beginnings of the Vandal War, because Admiral Bishop then addresses the Senate and is like, we need to take these things seriously. This is not a skirmish. We're losing a war. And we need to fight.
We're losing entire systems.
Yeah.
It's like billions of people, potentially.
And so this kind of preludes the official declaration of war by the UEE on the Vandal in 2945, I think. And then since then, we're living in a we're living in the Vandal Wars, like Star Citizen in terms of lore.
Is this the first official Vandal War?
First official Vandal War.
Okay, and before it was more just the Vandal killing us and us occasionally resisting?
Yeah. It was less, we're going on the offensive now compared to just being defensive, you know.
Gotcha.
The goal is eventually to retake the systems that they lost, but, you know, trying to not leave weaknesses. So. And
does humanity have any idea about the actual overall strength of the Vandal race in general?
Nope. Nothing. We have captured one kingship, which is this massive. For those of you who have seen in game the Bengal carrier, which is in Invictus, which is I think 1 kilometer long, a kingship is 3 times the size of a Bengal carrier. They're huge, and you will see them in game. They are massive, and we managed to capture one by accident. Because Vandal have this thing where if they're about to be captured, they overload their engines and blow themselves up rather than be captured. So we very rarely capture intact Vandal ships. But this one Vandal ship accidentally flooded radiation all over the ship, killing everyone before they could get activate the destruct sequence. So when humans discovered it, the Marines, UE Marines came on board, cleared out the ship, and were able to conquer it. And then we've studied that ship extensively for, I think, 2 or 3 years now. And so we know a little bit more about them today than we did.
Right. So some new tech hopefully is coming out in the future using this new Vandal tech, because they use different weapons like plasma weapons and blade weapons for ramming. Their ships have these kind of skeletal structures about them. They seem less interested in armor than they do just like pure brute force and power, you know. It's very cool aesthetically and creepy. It's kind of like being attacked by these skeleton ships in a way.
Yeah. They're very much anglerfish because they even have the little like light on it with the big like jaws. They actually can survive in vacuum without suits.
The species can.
Yeah. And the warriors, the more elite warriors, the more elite a warrior is, the more naked they become. So if you see a Vanduul with like that looks butt naked, they're probably a very, very experienced elite warrior. Whereas if you see one with full armor, then they're probably new. So
have do we understand the Vanduul language in the universe?
Yeah.
Okay. They just don't. They're not interested in like chatting, basically.
No. There are some stories of the Vanduul working with human pirates. So for like mutual aid sort of thing, it's like, hey, we'll give you this if you give us that sort of thing. So
and it seems like maybe there's some sort of narrative there for the single player game coming out with some sort of very cool, man. Well,
I'm sure that's probably longer than 5 minutes, but
well, you know what? I think you did a really good, concise job of like, hey, there's 20, 50 hours worth of information here.
Yeah.
Here's basically what'll get you up to speed in the best bullet points possible. I think that I found it really interesting. I had sort of an idea because I have listened to you talk about it before, but it is cool to kind of get an idea, establish where the universe is now. And right now, the persistent universe, which is, again, more of just a test bed for Star Citizen, takes place in Stanton, which is quite a ways away from Sol, isn't it?
4 jumps away from Sol. It's about 1 jump away from Terra.
Okay, well, that's not bad then.
Yeah, and the Stanton system is unique because it is completely owned by corporations. It's the only system.
Right.
Like each system in Star Citizen has its own kind of gimmick, and the Stanton system it's like this. It's like kind of like New York, if you want to think about it, or like Paris. It's this place where like all of this, if you want to go buy something, you go to Stanton, they have it. Just commerce is everywhere in Stanton. And it's because
the UEE sold the planets to these megacorps to get funding for whatever they needed at the time, correct?
The thing that we're needing was another thing that I didn't even talk about, which is Synth World, which is one of the things that after the end of the Measures, they wanted to be a kinder, gentler humanity. So one of the problems they didn't want to experience in the future is overpopulation and resource shortages. And since the ability to terraform planets is limited, there's only certain types of planets that can be terraformed, they began to work on a project to build a brand new planet from scratch. Effectively a giant planet that has, from the outside to the inside, all usable levels with atmosphere and gravity and all these sorts of things. And they called it Synth World Project, but it's incredibly expensive and time consuming. So that's one of the reasons why they sold pieces of Stanton off, was to pay for it. So.
A lot of basement real estate in Synth World.
Oh, yeah.
Who gets to live on the surface of Synth World?
Yeah.
The super wealthy. Yeah. Interesting. That is kind of cool. And I like the idea of all these super unique systems in Star Citizen, where, like you're saying, Stanton is unique because the UEE isn't the primary defense force of the system. It's privately owned. So each planet kind of has their own defense force protecting them. And the UEE will come in and can come in if something big happens, But for the most part, they're kind of like, we handle our own stuff here, which is pretty cool and interesting. Within the universe, the systems are being rolled out to the players in an order that I don't yet understand in terms of like why did we start at Stanton and not Terra or Sol or something like that. And the next system is going to be Pyro. I know a bit about Pyro, but do you mind like giving a brief summary of like maybe what sets Pyro apart from any other system?
Sure. The way I would describe it is Mad Max in space.
Yes, perfect.
Yeah, Pyro was a system that was controlled by a group called Pyrotechnic Amalgamated, which was a company that was a mining company that accidentally into the system when they discovered it. And so they were like, hey, we're going to put all our chips into the system. We're going to take out a bunch of loans and we're going to start mining through this system. And the problem is that Pyro Star is incredibly volatile and it sends out lots of radiation from it. So it's very difficult to live there. And they basically went bankrupt trying to harvest the system and build a giant station to hopefully terraform a planet, the outermost planet of the system. And since then, outlaws and rebels and other figures have moved in and they formed their own gangs. So Pyro is a system of many gangs, dozens of gangs from Xenothreat, whom we've already experienced, who have attacked the Stanton system, to groups like the Fire Rats, who are more of a cult than a gang.
Did the Ninetales exist in Pyro at all, or are they not interested?
Ninetales is Stanton based,
okay,
exclusively. But there's dozens of other gangs that exist in that region. There's even like an enforcer gang kind of thing that is a vigilante. They only attack other gangs and leave everybody on their own alone. But there are other people who live in Pyro, people who just live in Pyro because they're there because they want to be away from the UE.
Are there small colonies? Because when I was reading about it just through the star map, it seems like there's one massive sort of base, pirate base there or whatever.
Yeah. Ruin station.
Yeah, kind of like a mega-sized Grimhex or something, right?
Yeah.
But there are small colonies on certain planets. Do any of the planets have breathable atmosphere or anything like that?
They've gone through a retcon for it because originally it was like this whole place is blasted, no one wants to live there. But then they were like, that's kind of boring. So they went back and said that, like Pyro
I don't think
2,
they updated some of the info on the sites because I was reading through. I was like, the trailers they showed for Pyro show like little outposts and colonies, and it seems all right. Well, I'm glad they kind of went back on that a little because I mean. Yeah, everything being like a dead rock, kind of gets a little old after a while. Yeah. It'd be nice to have some sort of life forms and people walking around with wind blowing through the air.
So the fun thing about that is that when they wrote a lot of this lore for these systems, they were under the impression that you wouldn't be able to really land on any of these planets, maybe a small section of the planet originally. And
right. That's so crazy to think that they planned this out before. They're like, because a lot of people don't recognize, like right now people like to complain about not having server meshing and some of the higher level tech needed to complete the final vision of Star Citizen. But one of the biggest tech achievements this game, accomplished was procedurally generated planets where you could land on the surface and walk around seamlessly and all that stuff. Because that wasn't originally planned. It was going to be, you were going to see planets and there would be landing zones, which is pretty akin to how classic space sim games would do it. You'd see a planet and then there'd be like a landing zone type space and that's where you would interact. But other than that, that's all the planet was a landing zone for the most part. So it is cool to think about how like that was the plan initially, but then when they're like, hey, people can land here and we need to make these planets interesting to explore.
Yeah.
There's something like, is it like,
rocks.
Yeah. Is it something like 4 planets in Pyro?
No. Let me look up the details, but I think Pyro
it was like 16 moons or some crazy amount of moons and then like a few planets. Maybe I got it wrong. Oh no, it's six planets, 6 moons, I think.
It has 6 planets, and then there's one of those is a gas giant, and then one of the planets actually orbits the gas giant.
Very cool.
So it's and that has a bunch of moons around it. So
I love that they're doing that because it's like not a lot of people like. I think it's hard. Not a lot of people grasp the scale of even planets or moons in our system. Where like some of Jupiter's moons, I think, are even bigger than Mercury or something. So it's like, the moons of a giant planet can be bigger than an actual planet in itself. So it's neat to see that
our moon is bigger than Mercury or something like that. It's pretty big. It's one of the biggest moons compared to the bodies of like Earth and stuff like that. It's massive.
So I love that they're factoring that in because being on a planet, it's orbiting a gas giant. I still think one of the coolest experiences in the game, and every time I'll bring somebody new into Star Citizen, is landing on the landing pad of Olisar and you kind of look up and you're like, oh, do you see the size of this planet here? This is massive. It's taking up 180 degrees of my peripheral vision. And you're like, yeah, it's a gas giant. Like it's huge. It's way bigger than anything else. I love that the game can really sell the scale of stuff.
But yeah, with Pyro, it is a lawless system, like hands down lawless system.
And the UEE just doesn't care because there's not enough stuff happening there. It's more or less like use it as a jump destination if you need to get through from Pyro to somewhere else. But beyond that, like, are the jump gates even policed by UEE? Because it seems like if that was purely pirate controlled, they would want to establish some sort of commerce, right? Or do they not care?
So it's hard to tell with Pyro. Pyro definitely has infrastructure because it was built by Pyrotechnic Amalgamated when it was originally going in there. But it's likely that the UEE mostly patrols the Stanton side of Pyro jump point rather than the Pyro side, just to kind of try to keep people out. But the UEE is also incredibly stretched thin. The Vanduul War is massively like it's taking up most of the funding. So
gotcha. This makes a lot more sense with the rest of the lore and what's happening in universe now, like with the Nine Tails event, with this massive syndicate being able to actually attack and take some ground on a major city on a planet because the UEE doesn't have the forces to spare. And all of a sudden they're calling on essentially militia forces now to like try and police these systems that are just so understrapped for military resources. So that's pretty cool. It's interesting to know that because it gives way more context to me thinking like, well, how come Orison can't handle this? They're a rich company with all this resources. How come they can't put down a little syndicate, turf war? Yeah. But that makes more sense. It's cool.
Yeah. It also is the reason why, for instance, you can buy capital ships in game because the UEE is like, we'll sell them to the people and those people deal with defense. And so we don't have to worry about it. So, so Pyro is much more of a lawless system. You can visit it. It's not just criminals, but the UEE doesn't really want to deal with it. There's not enough resources and it's not on a trade lane. So it doesn't really match with what they like to see. So,
and the planets are dangerous, even though there is breathable atmosphere. You're getting blasted with solar flares all the time. Like, so the people that live there are kind of weird. Like, we don't want to be part of these bigger systems. We want to be out on our own and do whatever. That's pretty cool. Now I'm of the understanding that Nyx is the next system in the pipeline in terms of what they think will come after Pyro. And it does seem silly talking about the next systems because we've been waiting for just the second system for so long. But I imagine once Pyro's out and working, they have all the tools there since they've been teasing other planets from other systems for quite a while. It probably won't be that crazy before we get the next system, crazy long before we get the next system, which is Nyx. And I don't really know anything about Nyx.
So Nyx is one of those abandoned places where it kind of had some value early on, but it was never really super valuable. The resources weren't enough to set up commercial mining. The planets weren't really good enough for full terraforming. And it's sort of on the edge. It has some jump points here and there, but it's mostly kind of in this weird place where it's not direct. It's closer to the Gianna Empire, but it's like 2 or 3 jumps away. So it's never really been considered a valuable system to the UEE. So there are companies that called it home, a company that built a mining operation on a big asteroid called the Delamar, which is in the asteroid belt around Nyx.
Which used to be in Stanton.
Yes.
And then they moved it to Nyx.
Because it's supposed to be in Nyx. It just went home. Delamar just went home.
It's a good play. We tested out here in Stanton. Looks good. All right. Ship it off to Nyx.
Yeah. So, and there that eventually they abandoned the mining, and rebels during the Mezzer era took up occupation of the mining and kind of expanded it and called it Levski, which is the name of a famous resistance fighter from, I want to say, the Czech Republic, again in World War II. So they named it after him because they were rebels against the UEE, and they formed their own nation, which they called the People's Alliance of Levski, which is very, communism and kind of this sort of commune sort of style of government. And while they actively don't like the UEE, they don't have the resources or the ability to do anything, so they mostly just keep to themselves. So if there's any kind of pirates who occupy in that area, or they try to use Nyx and Levski as a home base, the People's Alliance of Levski will kick them out because they don't want to attract the UEE attention, because the last thing they need is the UEE breathing down their neck with
so the People's Alliance of Levski, they'll fight pirates then. So they'll try and police their own system. Yes. Or their own system. They kind of like calling it their system, and the UAE doesn't care enough about it to really, they don't have the resources or the time to deal with it, because it's not something that would be worthwhile for them, because they're like, we're fighting a Vandal war, like this is some backwater system that we don't need to deal with or whatever.
Exactly. It's not really important on any important trade lanes. And the fact that the PLA just wants to or PLL. Yeah. People's Alliance, PAL, the PAL. The PALs.
Okay.
Gotcha. The PALs are trying to deal with the piracy. They're just like, yeah, it's fine.
Gotcha.
Care.
Are there any interesting planetary situations there? Star, is it like binary star system or anything?
No, I think it's fairly mundane. It's one of those things where it's very, in general, it's not a very notable system. Because of it. It does have, I want to see how many planets. It's got 4 planets, or no, 2 planets plus Delamar, and it has, that's about it. It's a nice small system. It's very boring, which is why the People's Alliance of Levski like it, because they don't get paid attention to a lot.
Gotcha. So a somewhat smaller system in the sense of what's there potentially. Yeah. Then again, I'm sure they'll start talking about it more once Pyro's kind of in game and they can start previewing the next stuff. Now, after that, do you know what's coming next? Because I know the Odin system, and these systems, for anyone who's looking at the star map, are in a line. So Stanton jumps to Pyro jumps to Nyx, and Nyx will then jump to Odin, which is the system that I believe most of, if not all of, Squadron 42 takes place in for the single player game that's coming out in a few years.
Who knows?
Whenever in the future. It's coming out in the future. So is that planned to be the 4th system, or is that sort of we'll put it in whenever the single player launches, and if it doesn't come out too soon, then maybe some other system will come out? I don't know. I haven't heard the official word on that.
There's no official word on what's after Nyx.
Okay.
But almost everyone is assuming that by the time we get Nyx, we're getting close to, if not at, Squadron. So, and because Squadron 42 takes place before this persistent universe, they're probably going to try to keep it out of our hands as much as possible until after Squadron 42 releases, so that there's no spoilers on, what's going on. But there is a theory I have, which is that the next system after Nyx, if Odin is not ready, will be a system called Castra, which is a system that has a jump point to both Nyx and Pyro, and is a UEE system. It's a former military base that was turned into a small colony on this planet on the very edge of UEE space, close to the Xi'an space. So, and it only has 2 systems. It only has 2 planets, I should say, a small terrestrial planet and a gas giant.
But it is actively controlled by the UEE.
By the UEE, yeah.
Which would make it different than any of the previous 3 systems that would have been in the game. So you'd see more military presence there. Is your theory on that just because of its location and its convenience, kind of? Or have they hinted at actually building up assets for Castra?
They have, if you look at things like their concept art, in terms of concept art for various locations, Castra has more concept art than any other system outside of Stanton, Nyx, Levski, Earth and Terra.
Interesting.
So it's definitely one of those things they thought about a lot in terms of how they would implement it.
And is there anything interesting particularly about that system? Just because you said it seems like a simple system in general, 2 planets and some stuff.
The landing zone is really cool. The landing zone is built on top of a mountain. And
I think I've seen that concept art.
Yeah, it's above the cloud layer. So like if you look down, you just see a sea of clouds over it.
Cool.
The landing zone is called Sherman, and it has because it's military, it actually is one of the few locations where you can see old architecture style from like very early UEE and UPE and UNE kind of human history. Like it has like a small rudimentary base that was preserved, that was from its original discovery and foundation. And then as the military base has expanded, a lot of those buildings have remained the same from when they were. So they're examples of these architectural periods from back then. And it also the system itself borders the Toad Hill system, which is this really cool smuggling system with floating. It doesn't have the Toad Hill 3, which is the main planet of that system, doesn't have land masses. It has floating flowers. It has these massive botanical beds which float on top of the planet.
Oh, on the planet. Okay, I thought you meant the system just in general doesn't have land masses.
Flowers.
I was like, flowers in there. I was like, wow, they're really going off the normal. Okay. Yeah. I think I've seen some of the concept for that too, and that does look super cool. Who doesn't want a giant ocean planet? It's been in many sci-fi universes. I did see your video on smuggling in Star Citizen, which was very cool. And I think that's kind of a good segue into a question that I like to ask everybody who I have on the podcast, which is when the feature complete version of the persistent universe is out there, and feature complete could be all the systems in the game. It could just be all the functionalities in the game. And we have between 5 and 10 systems or something. What do you see yourself doing like in your ideal day of Star Citizen?
I mean, you mentioned it. I am I guess for the last several years, I've been very interested in smuggling, because for me, it's kind of a combination of, you got to be a good pilot, you got to be a good fighter when you need to be, and you're doing trading, but you have to know how to do trading interesting. Like there's a lot more skill to it. It's the
black market trading. You're not looking at the spreadsheets as much as you are making connections and knowing who to talk to.
Exactly. And you can go to interesting, dangerous places and do interesting, dangerous deals. That's part of what I want to do in terms of just the gameplay. But like my ideal kind of day in the life of Star Citizen would be smuggling, and then in the evenings, take one of my ships and open up a bar and have it open for people to come by and get a drink and talk and hang out and then leave. I want to create an AstroPub, an actual location based out of a ship in the game for people to come and meet and hang out and then head out if they want to.
Very cool. Any ship in mind that you're planning on using?
I'd love to use the Caterpillar, but
that would be cool.
You got that kind of aesthetic.
That would be neat if they let you do it. Because if you could knock out a couple of the bulkheads in a Caterpillar, or even keep them in and just have it be different rooms. And it's got a huge amount of space in it.
It's supposed to have a recreation module at one point. One of those modules was supposed to be swappable. And one of the things they've pitched was an idea of having like a bar and like a pool table. And I was like, I could just take that and then take like another like cargo area and turn it into a dance hall, and turn the catwalk into like a DJ booth, and then there we go. So
that'd be very cool. And then you make your further smuggling connections. You meet those people that need those certain items that perhaps are not, shall we say, legal in UEE controlled space.
Sir, I am a completely law-abiding citizen. Don't knock on the door and ask for Grockies in the back room. He totally doesn't have the things you're looking for that are quite illegal.
I'm very much looking forward to seeing how they implement like actual reasons for smuggling in Star Citizen, beyond just the mission-based concept. I used to do it in EVE Online a little bit. They had specific blockade runner style ships for smuggling. And I like in EVE, I like the way that they did it where there was performance enhancing drugs in EVE that you could manufacture in low sec. out, out of the prying eyes of the government. And then because these drugs are actually valuable because they're increasing your combat performance in Eve, where Eve isn't so much a player skill reaction time style game, but more of a numbers game, right? Where you're trying to get every little percentage of damage buff or shields raised. These performance enhancing drugs would increase your fire rate or your shield capacitors or something like that. And so there's an actual high demand for them. But to get them into high sec, you had to move quickly. You had to have the right kind of ships. You had to be able to avoid patrols. And I like that. I like that there was an actual demand. They created a gameplay loop for it. So I'm very curious to see how they might pursue something like that in Star Citizen. And if they've been following their current trend of how they're creating gameplay loops, I imagine it'll have many different levels of depth and different approaches to it, and depending on what kind of products you're selling and why people might want it or whatever. But I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, I'm up there with that. I think they'll definitely make a reason why you want to buy, say, Widow or Slam or Neon for some sort of reason other than just role play. These are all actual illegal drugs, illegal substances in Star Citizen's game right now that you can buy and sell on the market, but there's no real use for them yet. So
yeah, and I could imagine them even with the current game's mechanics, it's harder to apply it to, say, piloting a ship, which is how Eve used it. But in the ground mechanics right now, okay, you've got armor that's 40% damage resistance. Okay, what if you could take a drug that allows you to sort of push through a little more damage resistance or coagulate your blood faster so you're not bleeding out when you take damage, right? Because if you get shot in combat right now, you have to stop and heal. If it's a wound that is bleeding, you could have drugs that make you a little bit faster on foot, enhance your adrenaline or stimulate in a new way, allow you to aim down sights a little bit faster with heavier weapons. There's all kinds of cool things that I could be yeah, that would actually be pretty useful. If you're planning to do a big raid on your competitor's base, or you're doing some sort of big ground operation and you want the edge, right? Okay, well, we've already got the best combat gear. How do we give our players one extra little bit of edge over our enemies? Well, we need these illegal combat stimulants. The UEE doesn't support them because they have bad long-term effects or something, Yeah. But the pirates or the syndicates or the gangs don't really care. So I could totally see that being one angle, right? That could be pretty fun and something that I would want to buy it. I'd want to buy it in game, but I need people like you to bring it into Stanton where I can fight my turf war, Yeah.
Yeah. That's the whole thing.
It's awesome, man. Yeah. And I imagine deeper smuggling gameplay loops are probably a little ways off just because there's other things that have priority at the moment, but it is pretty exciting to think about long term. I wanted to ask you a couple questions because this was one of the things that I found most entertaining about one of the podcasts I heard you on Space Tomato, was just talking about some of the more interesting systems out there, because there are some really bizarre and unique systems. And I just wanted to ask you, is there any maybe two super interesting systems that we haven't talked about today that you think are ones that you can't wait to get to or explore for the first time?
So one of them that's really, really cool is the OSO system. So OSO.
Okay.
Yeah. OSO 2 is a high gravity jungle planet that has a sentient Stone Age species that are protected under the UEE law, but it's a vibrant world where lots and lots of creatures live. And because it's after the whole debacle with the terraforming that started the revolution,
right,
they passed what's called the Fair Chance Act, which is like Star Citizen's versions of the Prime Directive, where if people find developing life that could develop into sentience, the UE is all right, we got to protect it. No terraforming, no interaction. Study it.
Can you colonize still, or no, or you have to leave the planet alone?
you have to leave the planet alone, but it doesn't mean people don't go there.
Yeah.
and do some things that are not so legal, a little bit of smuggling. So it's a really beautiful world, and the concept art they have it is really cool. And it's
when you say high gravity, do you mean like double Earth gravity, or
like they haven't kind of explicitly said it, but I imagine it's significant compared to there's a species that lives on Oso, I believe, called the flat cat. What it looks like a cat that's been squished. Because it's been living on high gravity world. So, and it used to be a big craze for people to have flat cats as pets. So they're all over the place now. But they're from Oso. So
can't wait to have pets on board my spaceship. It'll be great. That sounds very cool. I did put in my notes, like, is there a Kashyyyk? Because that's one of my favorite worlds from Star Wars, and I really liked how they fleshed it out in one of the later video games, The Jedi Fallen Order. I thought they did a great narrative arc on Kashyyyk as this sort of resistance pocket against the Empire, where the Wookiees and whoever wants to join up with them are fighting against the Empire in this terrible jungle planet to, like, for anyone to try and take control of. The AT-ATs are getting overgrown and eaten alive just by the moss and the plants themselves. And then it's got like Avatar level birds and dragon creatures flying around and killing stuff. And it's just like, oh yeah, like Star Citizen's kind of hitting all the main notes in the sci-fi universe, right? Yeah. Like they're not really hiding their inspirations. You got Blade Runner, you got Star Wars, you got every major sci-fi universe bleeding into it in some way, and nobody's complaining, right? Like we all love them all, and it's fun. So I was wondering if Kashyyyk was going to make some sort of appearance, because you got to have the lush alien planet, right? You got to have the glow in the dark plants, Pandora, Kashyyyk, whatever, like but it would be that sort of ArcCorp level of technological hurdle to develop it, right? Because I mean, ArcCorp is running at like 90 FPS now. It's insane.
So one of the funny things about it is that a lot of the people who are part of Star Citizen's development team are the original developers of the Crysis engine and Crysis 1 game.
Right. I know they brought a lot of those engineers on board, because who better than the original people who made the engine?
So they've already made a jungle planet or jungle biome with Crysis, with the first original Crysis game. So people
could argue the engine was basically built for a jungle environment.
A jungle and ice. So that's so we're definitely going to see it, and I think Oso is probably the closest one we're going to get. There's another one that's called Goss, which is very similar, but that's much more touristy. It's this beautiful, lush planet, but it's mostly like a tourist destination where people kind of go hang out. But it's mostly archipelagos and forests and jungles and such. So,
and I imagine that in terms of, it makes sense that they will give us the systems that are in proximity to Stanton sooner, unless they want to do something silly like create a wormhole that just jumps to a system that's far away and amend it later or something.
Yeah, they might do that with Lear. I mean, I know your notes talked a little bit about Lear as well. We'll talk a little bit about
They
Lear.
Might have to do it, right? Because I mean, I think I was looking at the star system, and it's many jumps away from Stanton.
It's like the other 7. Side. It's the other side of the Empire.
It's a huge amount of jumps away. And I was like, why would they tease Lear 3 with a giant sandworm and then be like, all right, you'll see that in Never.
Never. Well, on top of that, they went even further. The brand new, like, there are 2 major maps for Star Marine. The third map that they created is on Lear 2. The Good Doctor is set on Lear 2. So it's like, why? Like, why are you doing this?
It's like, I understand the desire to kind of explore new things artistically, but it's also such a tease. Yeah. Speaking of Arena Commander and Star Marine, what are the systems in Arena Commander? Do you know there's 2 main space combat systems?
I don't remember what The first, I know Dying Star is Pyro.
Dying Star Pyro.
Is Pyro, yeah. The Broken Moon is another system that I don't know exactly, but it's a failed terraformation planet.
Yeah, Broken Moon's very visually stunning, and then they have these like, are those mining lasers or something?
They're terraforming.
That's how they terraforming. Okay.
That's how they warm up planets. Each planet is slightly different in terms of how you terraform it. So what they'll use those lasers is to like get into the core and try to like unleash as much like magma or as
heat up the core, get that core spinning, create a magnetic field. Simple stuff.
Yeah.
Terraforming 101. Terraforming 101.
Which takes a long time and it's very precise kind of procedures. So easy to mess up. See Microtech.
Yeah. Well, man, it sounds really cool. And I'm like, it's so fun to talk about. The lore is really interesting. And I know like like just what we've talked about here in like an hour and a half almost is just no, it's fine. I love talking about it. I could go on forever. If I didn't have to like eat and drink and sleep and stuff. But there's so much more here. And I do recommend anybody who's listening to like actually check out your YouTube channel, because I've started to go through the videos over there. And it's fascinating because you'll just pick one subject matter and deep dive into it. And I'm like, I can't believe they have this much about just this one subject matter of the universe, but it's very cool. It makes me extremely excited for Squadron 42, because I say this in just about every chance I get to on podcast or something, is that vertical slice they did in 2017 of Squadron 42, I thought was incredibly well written. And it sort of established my confidence in like, oh, hey, this single player is going to be good. Like, I can't vouch for the gameplay. I have no idea what the gameplay is going to be like, but in terms of the narrative and world constructing and all that stuff, it was well written, super interesting. The characters all felt believable. They weren't saying all these hacky, gamey things all the time. I was like, oh man, like this looks like it's going to be a legit experience. And that's always a worry with sci-fi games, because it's so easy for any sort of sci-fi show or book or movie to go full campy and not respect, I don't know, the laws of the universe they're creating, and just pull out some weird MacGuffin device that's going to solve all the problems or something. But this feels much more like we've established all the rules of the universe. Now let's create some super interesting characters and political dynamics and adventures to go along with it. And it made me so excited. And I thought that's when all the lore for the universe was going to kind of roll out, was with the single player game, until I started seeing you talk about it. And I was like, oh, wait, it's already here. Like the lore's being built up.
Yeah, it's framed.
Yeah. Like, I wouldn't say it's super easily accessible. You're doing a good job of that. Which I think goes hand in hand with all the information of Star Citizen right now, which is like, you're like, so when is this new bit of tech coming out? And you have to piece it together from like, a whole bunch
sources.
It's total insanity, which I think is why the content creators are so important for the game right now. Cause somebody will come out and be like, here's what's happening with like building things on a planet. Here's all the information that they've talked about so far. It's from like 10 different sources over the years and how they talked about it. And the same appears to be true with the lore. It's just like, it's all over the place, but
unlike
it's good.
Unlike the game, unfortunately, the lore is harder to see in game. So like it's not coming out. You don't see people talking about things. The events are kind of the first real crack into the lore, with things like Xenothreat, and people like Dooley and the Nine Tails incursions and such. Those are all very lore focused. And so you get a little idea like who the Nine Tails are, who Xenothreat is, who the UE is. But it's still difficult. And I think that's one of probably my biggest gripes with CIG, is that they are still very cautious about introducing lore to Star Citizen, because when they want to make sure that when they introduce it, it's introduced at a time where it feels right and that makes sense and that works. And so it's not like They're not sacrificing gameplay for the story in a game in development. So that makes sense.
Yeah,
I get it.
It does feel like so much is hinging on Squadron 42 to an extent, right? Because it's not just lore. It's like it's the ships that are tied into that lore too. Everybody's like, "Where's my Javelin? Where's my Idris? Where's this? Where's that?" And it's sort of like, "Oh, those might just come with Squadron 42 because we don't want to ruin some of the special things that happen with the single player." So I hope once Squadron 42 launches, it'll be like a floodgate of SC content and lore and stuff like that. I know. My hope is that Squadron 42 does so incredibly well that they're like, cool, let's plan the next single player game like right now. Or maybe they've already got the script for it and they're just going to like green light it as soon as they get the like budgetary confirmation or something.
That's actually what they've done. Was they originally wrote Squadron 42 and they looked at it and was like, the script was massive to what it was supposed to be, and so they said, let's just take this and pull it into 3 parts. So they actually have the entire like stage recordings of all of the actors for all.
Oh, no
3
kidding!
sections. Yeah. So they already.
So we're just going to get like 1/3 of
the full experience. It's a 40-hour experience. Last we heard.
Oh my god!
Beginning to end, 20 hours. For just
the 3 part is the 40-hour thing.
No. Part 1 is 40 hours.
Oh my god!
for main missions and secondary missions, about 20 hours.
And you're telling me they have motion capture recording for 2 beyond that initial 40-hour experience.
Yes. I'm sure that they'll have to do recaptures and reshoots here and there, just how it pickups things. But they have, as far as I understand, it's completely recorded for the entire spread of it.
I've been following the game for so long, and I didn't even realize that. What's his face? The guy. Yeah, Henry Cavill was one of the main characters in it. I was like, I knew about Mark Hamill, Gary Oldman, Gillian Anderson, a whole litany of other really well-known actors, and then it's like, oh wait, is that Henry Cavill just as one of the fighter pilots sitting there hanging out? I'm like, oh, they got him too. Of course they got him. Like,
fun fact, he's not just a fighter pilot; he's the leader of Squadron 42.
Oh man, he had to. Yeah, he's working his way into every little genre and being like, can I just be the main character guy? Can I be the guy that does all the cool stuff and saves the day? You mind if I'm that guy? Which is cool. Nobody's complaining. I don't think. So that's very exciting to think about. I mean, Star Citizen in general is very exciting to think about. I'm enjoying the game right now as is. I think it's a lot of fun. I think I'm getting into it like at a pretty good time because it's like I have just enough time to familiarize myself with almost everything in the persistent universe. And I think by the time I get a good grasp on just about everything they've added to the game, hopefully Pyro and the new persistent entity streaming and server meshing and all that will start to roll out, which will just give me is going to add that replayability factor to potentially just build out that universe and make it feel actually persistent.
Yeah, I was going to say that you're coming in at the perfect time because you're coming in just enough so you can learn. And then when everything changes, you'll be able to relearn a little bit. You have that base knowledge. And then you're going to be coming in when persistent energy streaming and when server meshing comes in, we're all new players. Because none of us know what's going to happen when you throw possibly 100 plus people into the same universe together and see what happens. There's going to be a lot of new stuff. And plus they're, of course, redesigning everything from the ground up anyway, right? It's going to be a new UI in the next year. It's going to be new combat mechanics and all that kind of stuff. So there's all kinds of things that are going to change, but it is really fun. It's fun right now. It's fun to watch it change. They deliver so much information about the game on a weekly basis that makes it fun to follow, and if you skip a week or two of staying up on things, you're like, oh, what's changed? Oh, wow, they've announced a whole bunch of stuff, so it's great to follow. I want to thank you for coming on here and basically being a storyteller. It's nice to sit back and just listen to the history of the UEE and the Earth Empire and everything. And I think I hope this video serves as a good introduction to you and also for people who are just like, oh, I didn't realize that Star Citizen had all of this narrative lore behind it already. So once again, where can people find you? Twitch.tv/TheAstroPub and YouTube.com/TheAstroPub. I'm live on Twitch Thursdays, Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays. But you also find me on my YouTube pretty much every week. I try to do one lore video a week, and I'm a madman, because as you know, as I've just beginning to explain, like, there's a lot of deep lore for Star Citizen. I've decided that I'm going to take it upon myself to do a comprehensive video of the entirety of the history of Star Citizen from the beginning to today. And the first episode is 45 minutes, and it's the extent of the least amount of information we have in Star Citizen.
Oh my God.
So I am dumb. But hopefully y'all will enjoy that.
I don't envy your task, but I look forward to watching it.
Yeah.
And getting that information out of you. I know a couple other YouTubers that do the like entire history of this game franchise or something, and they'll be like, yeah, I just did my first pass on the script and I think it's going to be about a 5-hour long video. And I'm like, you guys are crazy.
I don't like sleep. That's the answer.
Yeah. But it is cool. I'm in awe of your ability to retain so much knowledge about this universe. I'm sure it comes in handy as a history teacher.
Yeah. I said, don't be in awe of it. It's I've replaced all useful information with lore. So, ask me to do anything but lore or history and I will fumble at it. But
you know, I mean, that's kind of the gamer conundrum. If we actually if we put the amount of energy and effort into anything else in life that we did in games, you know, it's like, imagine what we could have accomplished.
We could solve world hunger and create world peace if we just weren't playing Halo and Battlefield all the time.
Yeah. But I did get all the things I needed in Diablo 2, so now I feel accomplished.
I reached my prestige rank 2, so I'm good, you know?
Yeah. Oh, man. But it was a pleasure talking to you, Paul. It was good to meet you. And
thank you for having me on. It's really nice to come on to the show, because I've like I said, I've been earlier. It's like I've been following you for Battlefield for quite some time. So Battlefield is my secret second game that I play a lot of. So
oh really? Okay,
yeah.
I didn't realize that you were a secret Battlefield fan.
Awesome. I've been in Battlefield since Battlefield 2. So
okay,
I've been around for a while.
The good old days.
Yeah. So my favorite's still 2142, but that's just because, you know, sci-fi. So
the least popular Battlefield.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it was financially the least successful overall, but that was kind of a weird era in which they didn't launch it for consoles, I think, is what happened or something.
Yeah, it was pre Bad Company. It was after Battlefield 2. It used Battlefield 2's engine, and then they released Frostbite, and then they released Bad Company, and then they released Battlefield 3, and then they released Bad Company 2, and then they started in the whole.
It was right, or EA and DICE in particular have always been like a step or two behind the norms of gaming trends, which is like at that time, if you had a big shooter, it was coming out on console.
Yeah.
And they're like, here's our big shooter, not on console. And basically like a huge percentage of the PC shooter crowd was playing on consoles that day, you know, because like Halo had kind of upset the apple cart and all this other stuff was happening. And so, yeah, things were a bit different back then. But yeah, I have a place in my heart for 2142. I think I played a few competitive tournaments with that game. But I got to go pick up my kids from daycare in a couple minutes.
Thank you.
I'm going to wrap up the podcast here. But for anyone watching, I hope you guys enjoyed. Make sure you check out AstroPub. I'll put some links in the video description and comments for them. And I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit about Star Citizen's lore. Paul, once again, thank you so much for dropping by. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.